Good. And in the audience, welcome very much to Conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program. In my way of thinking, one of the most important people involved with producing meaningful, politically relevant, intellectually relevant programming in a multimedia format that there is, in a progressive vein particularly, but that's Lenny Charles. And Lenny Charles is the founder, producer, and editor of the International News Net, or I.N.N. World Report. And Lenny, it's so good to see you again on this a couple of days after the recent election, but welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me on, Harold.
My pleasure. And let's go back a little bit over your own background. You've been in this game for quite a long time doing television programming. And maybe you could just give us a quick rundown. And we want to talk about that major conference that you had recently before the election. And then we want to get to the implications and effects of the recent election, that sort of thing. But share your own background, if you would, please, briefly.
Well, let's, I guess to answer your first question, we started producing the I.N.N. World Reporter's weekly show back in 2003 for Free Speech TV, and then with the Republican National Convention coming to New York, I believe it was in the
something 04,
04, whenever that.
Yeah,
it's been so long.
They were marching down the 7th Avenue.
Yeah, marching down all that.
We couldn't go to Central Park because we were going to trample the grass.
I think we'd have been trampled, but in either case, everybody worked very hard on that, and we went to a daily format during the election, and then after the election there was still some dispute over what had happened in Ohio, so we stayed in a daily format, and then we noticed that we were becoming more relevant as we became a daily go-to news source, and that's what we decided to do. And it was, of course, a struggle trying to raise money and go to foundations, which was unsuccessful, going to viewers and fundraisers and beg, borrow, steal to keep the show on there, but we did that.
You did indeed, yeah. And we
did that successfully for 5 more years.
I can remember you got that wonderful place. It'll become a national monument or something in the fullness of time. But the Walker Theater downtown, you got a very important building there. And I can remember you were the one who was working out the whatever it is, algorithms and so forth, that Democracy Now! Was able to get up onto the internet, streaming in a way back, and you helped get Amy out and going like that, if I'm not mistaken. Remember you working out the algorithms? It
was a little different than that. We were instrumental in first getting Democracy Now! On television, in that she would film over at the Firehouse Studio. Back then it was pretty simplistic format, a couple of cameras, and her reading the New York Times and the leather vest and the et cetera. If everybody remembers the early shows, which was, they were kind of, I found them very genuine back then.
Yeah, along with Dee Dee Halleck and her, you know, what do you call it? I forget that,
But they would film this, and they would do a little 2 or 3 camera switch. They'd take the mini DV tape, and they would walk the 2 blocks over to my studio, where I had a MPEG-2 encoder, which is standard television format, although it's changing now. And I would take that, and then I would FTP this massive file.
That'd be big, yeah.
Yeah, it was I think 1.2 gigabits. It was just a huge file, and we would send it 1.2 gigabits.
Okay, yeah.
So almost at
that time it was huge.
At that time it was huge. Now it's a little easier with the movie downloads, but we would send that over file transfer protocol, or FTP, to Free Speech TV server, and then they'd play it several hours later. So that was the let's say the transformation of Democracy Now! From a radio-only program to a radio and TV broadcast. Well, they
quickly got up on Free Speech, and she's she's everywhere now.
Well, no, but we got her to Free Speech, and that's how that became. And then all of a sudden, people recognized what was going on. And they threw bushels of money at that show, and then they were able to get a real-time simulcast, which is what they've been doing since, and that's takes a lot of money to do that, but they do it every day, and we look forward to the show.
She's become like a progressive superstar, and has huge attention everywhere. I can remember back when you were getting started, Brian Drolet also was involved in terms of trying to get some progressive programming into the multimedia market or the multimedia distribution systems, and that's still a very important kind of thing to keep in mind. How can progressive or intellectually relevant ideas be got to the public and that sort of thing?
Well, I think television can be used as a great coalition building tool. One of the things we were known for, believe it or not, was bringing together progressives, far left and far right together. We had Ron Paul on our show, and we had Bruce Fein on our show, had I think Bob Barr on our show, and some of these people, and we...
As well as Michael Parente.
Oh, as well as Michael Parente, yeah. But we were able to challenge them on a bunch of issues which were important to progressives, and believe it or not, we found out that the libertarian right, we had much more, not the Tea Party right, not the conservative right, not the banking right, or the corporate right, but the libertarian right, the traditional constitutionalists, that the progressive left had a lot more in common. Both didn't want a war. Both were very, very interested in not spending money on a war, and they were very interested in they were also very interested in personal liberties and protecting the Fourth Amendment, protecting the Constitution.
Does that still hold? Are there those elements out there? Because the whatever's going on in the name of challenging the system seems to all the attention is going to this Tea Party thing, that's the move Sarah Palin and all that. But is that libertarian community that you could make common cause with still there, functioning? Is it still relevant? And what do you think now?
How fast does the political scene move? Have those people really changed their ideology? The same ones that had no problem finding common ground with a transpartisan type of coalition, have they really abandoned that and saluted Sarah Palin? I don't think so. I think that the core values, and these core values, the funny thing about the core values that we try to go towards within our programming are really just common sense and really the tenets of basic religion. If you think about it, there's not a major religion that tells you to take your neighbor's land and kill their children and rape their wives. Very few religions talk about that, none that I know of. Well, if you stick to those rules and then you mind your own business, which is kind of a libertarian model, you can see how there is some common ground, whereas I think in the name of fear and in the name of empire, in the name of greed and need and everything else, we see people to the center of, well, if you've got the libertarians here and you've got the true progressives here, you see so many people in the center that are just somehow inverting right and wrong. They're inverting right and wrong, and they're doing it for capitalism, or they're doing it for safety, and they don't mind giving up personal liberties, and they don't mind doing harm to other people in the world. And it's a great way to make enemies, but I don't think they're adhering to the rules of any religion. And so this to me was always a phenomenon. So there's something about having a strong moral compass or moral backbone when you create programming. You don't have to be a religious person. You just have to understand the value of life and that other people have the same rights as you do. And going on that, you try to promote news when it's going the other way, and promote news when it's going that way, when people are being more even-handed and more kind and more forward-thinking in their actions.
Yeah. That's all good. You were on Free Speech TV for a long time.
7 years.
And that Free Speech TV is a major vehicle for alternative programming. I watched a good deal of the election returns on our Channel 34 here, or Channel 1 here at MNN, and it was with Amy and Laura Flounders and Michael Moore, and it was coming from Free Speech TV headquarters in Denver and so forth, and it was a progressive take on the election returns, which was an interesting thing to mix up with ABC, NBC, CNN, and MSNBC and so forth, the returns. But it's an important vehicle for getting multimedia programming out to the people?
It is, but there's also there's a change in the era as we go over to media on demand and internet-based media and internet-based downloads, and of course now mobile downloads on your iPhone and iPad and all that stuff.
It's amazing, yeah.
But how you get it, it's like the model of a needle in a haystack is gone to the nth power almost. It's like what used to be you'd want to get several million people to make programming valid. Now if you go ahead and get several thousand people, that's considered an advertiser's dream, to get out there. So the markets have been more diversified and they've become much smaller. So when you get on something like Free Speech TV, yes, it's available in 30 million homes. But
a large number.
How many people are actually watching free speech? Well, some of that's going to have to do with where their heads are at, what they're interested in, entertainment value, production value, and all the other things that free speech and any other small network like I.N.N. is trying to get out. Yes, we have a strong moral backbone, and we're trying to keep that within our programming, but at the same time, you have to entertain people. You have to keep them. You have to keep their attention. If you have on a great guest, like a Michael Parente or a Harold Channer, perhaps, if you have a really good guest on,
Lenny Charles.
If you have a really good guest on, that person talking and their ideas are going to be able to hold somebody's attention. They're going to be fascinated. Sometimes you go over to C-SPAN, which is a wonderful model, and you got some guy that's about as boring as watching wheat grow. Nothing going on. And you're sitting there and you're saying, I don't want to go to a commercial channel. I don't want to see all those commercials and see violence and all that. But at the same time, they're not holding my attention. So the trick is to really try to hold people's attention as you create programming.
Well, it's like marketing. Yeah. And people are wanting to get eyeballs. And it's coming out of the advertising industry. You want to get people to watch the program so you can sell the ads that sell the cornflakes to the people and make a profit. That's the model.
I think we call it capitalism.
Well, that's part of capitalism. It's also part of marketing. And I suppose anybody with an idea, they used to make some awfully boring television in Soviet Russia where they were talking about the wonder of the tractor. And it had all kinds of meaning in terms of a Marxist view of things and everything, but it wasn't very exciting or anything like that. And so you do that, and so you get, but when you get down to the realm of ideas and so forth, there's, if you look at the normal, what do we got, 500 channels now that are coming on cable? I don't know, and it's just galloping all the time. They got channels on everything, and a lot of it's all sort of entertainment-based. Some of it's really quite good. You get good things on Nova, you get good things on public television, and that sort of thing. And then politically, you got MSNBC. That's a series that runs on cable television, and that would be seen as a left-wing thing with Rachel Maddow and you know, Keith Olbermann and Chris Matthews and that sort of thing. You have CNA, that's Wolf Blitzer and so forth, that's sort of in the middle. Then you have Fox News, and they have their own slant on it. But where do we have, or is there a need for, and does Free Speech TV part of a system that would be relevant to something that is what would be comprehensively relevant to a large view of seeing things, the political context, the intellectual understanding of economics and so forth, in a more radical context than the safe center that those things represent, if that's the case?
Let me please correct you. There's nothing radical about the kind of thinking and the kind of broadcasting that we do, or many of the programmers on Free Speech do. It really does represent a common sense and also a somewhat moralistic view of the world.
I take radical to be a laudable thing. It means going to the roots of things rather than the surface. It means going to the root of things and understanding things in a meaningful way rather than a cosmetic way. I don't take it to be a negative. I look for it. Or you could call it creative, really creative and relevant.
Radical usually means fringe to me, so I kind of try to avoid that word. Different interpretation of radical.
Okay.
Free Speech TV, I believe, is going through a transformation. Hopefully we'll be part of that family again.
I would certainly hope so, because you've put on some of the very best programming that keeps the attention of people who are intellectually interested of anywhere else in terms of multimedia programming.
When I was trying to sell the idea of bringing the show back to the new executive director, he was saying, well, you know, we're a little reluctant to bring on new programming. And I said, you're not bringing back new programming. You're bringing back one of the most popular shows that was on Free Speech TV for years that people sorely missed. And I had to really convince him of that. It was part of it. This is not a new show. We're actually going to be hopefully picking up where we left off with a little break for recreating the show and restructuring things.
You're still programming. You're still doing.
Well, right now, the News and Research Department, which is 4 people who work too hard for too little money, we do 3 daily newscasts every day, which is the same basic 3 or 4 daily newscasts, depending on which day, which is the same basic news that we would run in the front end of our show. But we divide them into 3-minute packages, and they go on a whole bunch of stations. Now, just this morning, I heard that. WBAI was using one of our newscasts. Well, today's Friday. This is going to air in a few days. But KPFA, Dennis Bernstein and Flashpoints is using it. Harrison on KPFK in Los Angeles is using it.
Are those part of the Pacifica network?
Those are the Pacifica flagship stations. Those in Washington, D.C. It's being used within certain shows. Also, it's being used in Daily Drive-By in Portland, Oregon. So it's getting out there. There are a bunch of smaller stations that are using it too. And so we put these out as an RSS feed, and radio stations are welcome to take them down, and they can donate or help out if they can.
Could you mention that again? You went fast. RSS feed, what is that? For the audience. it's important.
The acronym has escaped me. Really simple.
But no, but what is it? What is it? It's a way of
it's
distributing.
Well, now it's on something which Pacifica created, which is called Audio Port. But the idea of an RSS feed is it's a little button, I guess, you stick on your browser bar, and if you click on it, it takes you directly to the FTP site where you can download the individual broadcast, and these are audio format MP3s usually that anybody could download if they went there, and they can and then they'll load them into their playlists. So that top of the hour news brought to you by I.N.N. World Report today in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera.
It can distribute. I think we had a thing here where they were archiving programming that's aired on M&N here on their website. I think they were doing.
Well, the RSS feed is an easy way for broadcasters around the country to go directly to the audio files that they can then quickly download and put into their playlists and whatever. Whatever electronic gizmo they've got to do that.
Anyway, you've been doing this for a long time. I remember talking you off the fire escape. You were ready to jump off when one of the elections took place where the Republicans prevailed. And you said, "What's happening to this country?" And I was able to talk you off, jumping off the thing in despair at the political context at that time. We just had a big election result that a lot of people are saying is not amenable to the way they'd like to see the society organized. But let's get to the thing. You still have you're operating down Walker Street, and you had this major conference too. Do you think it might be worth mentioning? It was a month or so before the election, and maybe we could talk about that. And we do have a little clip we want to show some that you brought in. But
Howard, you're asking me to shamelessly promote our event, and I'll be happy to do that.
By all means, it should be promoted because it's really good, intellectually relevant stuff you're doing, and politically relevant. Well, and we need that.
I.N.N. has always been, I wouldn't say been part of, but we've given a fair shake to the 9/11 truth community, as many shows have avoided like the plague.
Yeah, I know, it's true.
Well, we, although not endorsing anyone's position, we felt that if you've got people of a certain prestige and of a certain set of qualifications and they want to say something, far be it from us to deny them the opportunity to speak.
Free speech, it's called.
I thought it was fee speech.
No, it's not supposed to be fee speech. I understand that. That's the other world. Free speech.
Free speech.
Hyde Park
all right.
Corner
so when you've got
free speech, let all voices be heard. Yeah.
When you've got a gentleman representing 1,400 AAA architects who are putting out documents and signing petitions, going like, "You was demoed." The government was. We don't know what happened, but we know that what they told you happened didn't happen. And then you've got people like Niels Harrit, who was at the conference, and Stephen Jones, and Kevin Ryan, and so many others that were there that now have put out a paper last year, and I think a lot of people heard about the paper, and I don't know the exact title of it, but it's basically active thermitic material found in World Trade Center dust samples. It was a major paper. It was peer-reviewed. It was published in the Open Journal of Chemical Engineering, I believe, prestigious all over Europe in many languages, peer-reviewed and accepted. Most Americans will never hear of it. And what they found was they took independent dust samples and they found from ground zero, from the day of, with a verifiable chain of custody. They analyzed them in the laboratory, electron microscopes and all that, and they found not only iron-rich microspheres, which need incredible temperatures to form, they found unexploded chips of red and gray thermite, which were still active. And some people have talked about this, and I'm not going to endorse, I can't, as a journalist, I cannot say this is the truth. I can never do that, but I'm going to say that the evidence they found is very compelling. And one of the sad things was, and by the way, the conference was not about 9/11 truth.
That, it was about some sort
of not only that at all. Only one panel even dealt with things like that. The conference was about how the world changed after 9/11.
Thank you.
But the last panel, on the last day of the conference, we called it the science of 9/11, what the government got right, what the government got wrong. And we tried to promote a debate. There are so many out there. David Ray Griffin, who's written on this, wrote a beautiful article saying the gatekeepers of the left, referring to Alexander Coburn and Norm Solomon and Hayes and Matt Taibbi and all these other people who had, and of course Arianna Huffington and Chip Roulette, and all these people who had gone out of their way to discredit anyone who didn't believe exactly what the government said. They went out of their way. They didn't say, well, we don't know, we're not qualified to talk. They went out of their way to attack that whole thing, saying that it was divisive for the left. So we went back to each of these people, offered them a plane ticket, a place to stay, or even to just submit questions. And I said, if you don't believe what this panel has to say, that's okay. We're going to respect your opinion too, but can you make a presence and can we have a legitimate debate? Every last one of them, including Greg Palast and including Michio Kaku, would not even return personal calls and letters from people that they knew.
We just did a program with Michio Kaku today as we talked, November 5, from a couple
years
back.
Well, traditionally, I mean, we've had Michio Kaku on our show. Traditionally, we respect him. We think he's a great guy.
Yeah.
We asked him to participate in any way. He could not believe a word of it. He could say, you're all crazy. He could say whatever he wanted. He wouldn't even return an email or a phone call.
Well,
and that was disappointing. This is such a third-rail issue.
Now you're talking now.
I'm talking about the science panel. I'm not talking the conference is a whole different thing.
The science panel was also looking at larger issues beyond just that one.
No, they were not.
At what happened after how the world changed.
No, the entire conference was on how the world changed after 9/11. The first 7 panels were on how the world changed after 9/11. The eighth panel was the science panel.
Yeah, I'm trying to say that you weren't only constant. You had a lot of speakers there on a lot of different issues that are relevant to the way the world is seen and ought to be seen.
But what was so sad, and the point I'm trying to stress, is that we genuinely and very sincerely reached out to so many people who had been critical and said, look, we're not going to criticize you for being critical. We're not even going to challenge you. We would like you to, instead of lobbing these journalistic bombs over a fence, come here and, if you're going to accuse these people, you have to face. If you're going to accuse them of being crazy, you've got to face them. The problem is the people we had on the panel, their credentials outweighed even the government's credentials on this issue.
Right.
But let's talk more about
that issue is right. There are issues at the surface that are needed. That I take note of the fact that Galileo, when he said we weren't the center of the universe, faced tremendous. He was imprisoned because he said that we were not the center of the universe, that people got their identity from, a whole paradigm of thinking that was not correct in terms of what was emerging. So Pasteur had the same problem when he said there were things like germs and that kind of thing. People who have an idea that is not in keeping with the established order often run into difficulty with people who have an interest in the established order, and that's a problem that we've got in terms of understanding the evolution of understanding in the historical pattern.
Let's talk a bit about the overall focus of the conference, how the world changed after 9/11. Let me tell you about the first panel was a panel on alternative media. It had Danny Schechter.
God bless him.
Had Lynn Landis. It had Christina Borgensen. And it had Robert Anderson from Fordham University.
Okay.
That was all, and they talked about the difficulties they'd had in how journalism has gone to the right and how, and of course in Christina Borgensen's case, she had quite a bit of a claim. How in the Flight 700 thing out over Long Island when it was shot down,
yeah, I remember.
All the information she found out was completely suppressed by the media. They had to go with their story, and she was very disappointed over that. And then anything she said about 9/11, just as far as a more realistic investigation, she's been shot down. She's actually gone so far as to reach out to colleagues that she's had long relationships with and trying to figure out ways of getting any information out to challenge it without seeming like you're either, un-American or a kook or something else. She said that she had come up against a brick wall like she couldn't even imagine. She said it was really impossible.
It's in a lot of different things are emerging around the marijuana issue now. You finally got medical marijuana. There was probably a mistake in putting it Schedule 1. There's a lot of changes that are in the air, and that's beginning to bring into question now not only that, but economic theory and how are we going to organize the economy in face of the recent meltdown. There's a lot of angst, free-floating angst in the air now.
As was reflected in the elections.
As there was when you had as was reflected in the elections, yeah.
The second panel we called it Goodbye Fourth Amendment. It had on it Ray McGovern, who we all know, CIA analyst for 26 years, gave the daily briefings to good old Ronald Reagan.
Brilliant fellow, yeah.
We had also a lady named Catherine Albrecht, wrote the book Spy Chips and how RFID chips, radio frequency identification chips, are put into all our clothing and objects, and how these things can be used to invade our privacy and to track our every move.
Well, it's also a way to track a product that you can do for marketing principles. So they're going to be utilizing that kind of technology. They're going to instantiate that maybe even And it's going to become part of the
but
order
it becomes,
as we get into nanobots and things.
Yeah, but it becomes a violation of our right to privacy within the Constitution.
Yes, a lot of the things, the possibilities, is a two-headed sword. There's a lot of positive possibilities. There's also a lot of invasion of property and principles that have been held sacred.
I'm okay with barcodes. These things here, if you've got an RFID chip in the sleeve of your coat and you walk under a reader, which could be in the doorway, they can say, oh, the guy who's wearing that coat was here at this time.
Right.
Kind of like your credit card, kind of like going through Easy Pass and a bunch of other stuff. But a lot of people are very alarmed on that, and that would be a little more the libertarian side of things.
Yeah, right. Again, it's interesting that you have a common cause with some of the people on the libertarian, and I'm just wondering if those libertarian, reasonable libertarian people still exist, or has that whole take on the national order or the world order been taken up by the Tea Party kind of thing that has had such an effect on the elections?
Well, look at this model, just how a lot of progressives may feel disappointed that they've been abandoned by what they considered the party that they were most closely aligned to, but they haven't stopped being progressives, and I think a lot of the libertarians, your thinking is not going to turn overnight, was my point.
Libertarians are progressive?
No. They share some of the values and some of the goals. Can you be a libertarian and be still,
and what do we mean when we say progressive? What is progressive? How do we get a definition of progressive? There is a movement in time of all institutions and so forth, but progressive, in my way of thinking, usually is something where there's really concern for the mass of the people, a democratic order, rather than only the interests of those who are very well financed and in positions of great political power or influence that you would be sycophant to, which is the normal pattern that many of the people do in order to have a better life for themselves and their family.
I don't think anyone is pretty happy with these mega corporations right now, just running roughshod over the entire planet. Nobody's happy with it, and I don't care if you're a libertarian or a real progressive. Let me tell you who else is on that panel.
Okay.
Colleen Rowley, Time Magazine's 2002 Person of the Year. Had the FBI listened to Colleen Rowley before 9/11, they certainly could have prevented it. But it was kind of squashed up at the Bush administration. Her memo was squashed, her request to search into a certain computer. She was an FBI field agent from Minnesota. She had discovered certain information that would lead her to, she wanted to get a warrant to look into further information. Had she discovered that information, which came out later, 9/11 could have easily been prevented. Only the request for that information was suppressed by the Bush administration, therefore she couldn't get it. And even if you don't believe that, no matter what side you believe, this was definitely a squashing of information. And she worked with the FBI director.
That's an important issue on and the means by which they classify things. It's always just to cover an embarrassment on somebody who made a bureaucratic boo-boo or something, rather than have anything
in her case, she had
national security. As they
in her case, she was screaming at the top of her lungs from the inside as an FBI agent over this information she had. And who after it happened, she, after they looked into it, Time Magazine made her. It was the whistleblower, cover, and she was Time Magazine's.
There was also another woman who was in the realm of the political order and everything, who was saying things about that were leading up to the implosion, as it almost mini implosion of the economy, who was questioning things the way the derivatives and so forth were being done. I forget her name now, but she was making these recommendations. She was making these assertions that there was great difficulty coming because of the way the market was drifting and so forth. I can't remember her name. I'm glad who's the woman? Elizabeth Warren we now have is one who's been appointed for that. But it was somebody similar to who called the shot perfectly, and her work was suppressed, even though it might have caused the system not to go into the default that it did in September of 2008, which has caused such angst all over the world now and is still worrying us. Although I see the Dow, as of today, it's up to where it was before Lehman imploded. So maybe Mr. Obama has managed to save the system. That's another thing we could get into. But there's other people that are not... I can't remember her name, the woman who did that, but it will come to us. So anyway,
managed to save the system.
Yeah, like
for the rich people of the world, I think is
well,
what he's meant to save it for.
That would be seen.
Who did he save it for? How many foreclosures are we facing this year?
Many.
How many people are homeless?
Yeah.
How much poverty is? What is the unemployment rate? And what system did he save exactly? I'd like to
that's
know.
the thing that's the thing we're questioning now, or we're wondering about.
Yeah.
You've got Europe that's gone very much along another kind of way and so forth, and you've had a lot of the world who felt that the capitalist system where you have private property and individual rights and the ability for people to have investment in capital instruments and own the means of production is something that tends to have all the benefits very closely linked to the upper 1% or so of the population. And as always, it has been. It was the same with kings who had, control and ownership of all the stock on their estate, including the serfs. And it's always been a few people who were in control and run things, and the mass of the people walling around in the mud, and essentially serfs, or like slaves. It's always been like that, and it continues to be. We're in that. And it's a private sector system. This election, I would warrant, is one that is going to make it virtually impossible for any dreams of the left to do away in the United States of America with recognition of the institution of private property ownership of capital instruments. And I think that's something that the right wing is concerned with, don't you? Or do you think the progressive left would do away with it as they did in the Soviet Union, the idea of individual ownership of private property? That's a particular issue that seems to be, now when you got Boehner and so forth in the House, and that's something that's going to have to be dealt with by people who are looking for a way in which the society is going to organize itself.
I'm not sure how that's gonna play out. And I thought about it a bit, how that's going to happen. But I have to tell you, because the time's going to run out, and I have to tell you more about the conference.
Okay,
let me at least go to that. And we should show a clip of it at least.
Yeah, we got a clip we want to show.
Anyway, continuing on that panel, Annie Michonne, former MI5 agent, she was responsible for exposing the plot by MI5 to assassinate Muammar Gaddafi. She had to go on the run. She wrote a book. She was wanted. Her partner was thrown in jail. She was the fourth person on that panel. The panel after that was called Resistance is Futile. I think that was the subtitle of it. It had on it Cindy Sheehan, Sarah Flounders, Mathis Chereau, and Elaine Brower from The World Can't Wait. So 4 major activists were up there talking about how things have changed since 9/11 in the world of activism and in the world of even in stopping the war. There was a big surge to stop the war, but how things have changed. And Mathis Chereau spoke about...
Which war are they going to stop?
I don't know. How many do you need?
The one is what's going on in Afghanistan now. It looks to me
technically
like
almost the same war.
Imperialism's well in order, and the troops are there, and it's dabbling up a huge
status of forces is fairly nailed down, and the oil, the hydrocarbon law is fairly well in place. They bought out the parliament. But so anyway, Mathis Chereau spoke on that. Sarah Flounders talked about organization.
Sarah, God bless her,
And Cindy Sheehan, of course, is always...
Cindy, I met her at a thing with Ahmadinejad when he was in town. It was good to see Cindy Sheehan.
I think I saw you there.
We did. Of course we did see you. I hadn't seen you in a long time. That's what led to our doing this program today.
That's right.
It's like Old Home Week that night. There was a lot of support for Mr. Ahmadinejad among the left wing.
Well, there's a mixed bag for you.
Yeah.
The last panel on Saturday, September 11th, was called Rule of Law, Speak Truth to Power and Pay the Price. The panel was Cynthia McKinney, Senator Mike Gravel, Governor Don Siegelman, and Tom Kiley, who I started the project with. He was the moderator of that panel.
Mike Gravel,
and to hear Mike Gravel and Cynthia McKinney and Don Siegelman speak, people were going crazy. It was unbelievable. We had over 200 people packed in.
Was Gravel in good form? Mike Gravel?
Gravel's always in good form.
Yeah,
He's wonderful.
I love the man. I did a program with him way the hell back when they were just bringing the Alaskan pipeline, and my man Louis Kelso, who wants to expand ownership of capital assets to everybody to distribute demand capability. We're going to build a thing for the Alaskan pipeline. He was a senator from Alaska then, and he understood that principle that goes back to that idea of how we're going to deal with the institution of private property and the fact that private sector ownership is a way of distributing income rather than only through jobs and through labor, which I think is a huge thing that's confronting us. And if I could take just a second, I watched the election returns, and they had Peter, what's the fellow, the David Brooks, and Walter Matthau and Charlie Rose. and water, and not math, Peter, the guy, Michael, on MSNBC, the main guy. I can't remember, it'll come to me in a minute, but the main guy that's on all the time, they were talking about the situation, what it meant, and he said, we're going to have to do infrastructure in the home, in the center of the country. It's not just California, New York, and design and all this kind of thing. We're going to have to build railroads and all this sort of thing, and get those factories going, get those, and Mr. and David Brooks said, oh, you're going to talk about trains? And he said, yes, and he said, yeah, we could just create these trains and so on. And David Brooks said something that was very strange to me. Peter what's his name? He said, yeah, but what we've discovered, he just said in the past, the thing, he said, we can build tremendous production, that is supply side. We can build trains and we can build railroads and so forth, and we find that the trouble is that the people that can do that do not need the workers to build the production. And they just let it pass. But I think that's a major issue that's confronting the human condition, is that the productive capability is increasingly in the realm of capital instruments that are all owned everywhere by a tiny plutocratic class, and the only way income is distributed to the masses is through their having a job on the estate of the people who own all the assets, and the left won't say everybody should own the assets as a way of distributing income to them. Well, and he just let it pass. He just said, yeah, they can do it. We've got a tremendous productive capability, but we don't need the people to do it. You get an algorithm that can get rid of 500,000 people, and you can't keep distributing only by jobs, as we're used to. And that's a problem as far as the left is concerned, because they don't have any brief for the institution of private property ownership, which could be a source of income for everybody rather than just the capitalists. I don't know if that's off base, but...
I've always wanted to be a serf. I know that.
You want to be a serf?
I always wanted to be a serf. Very little responsibility.
Yeah.
Just wait for the food to come at dinner time, and you'd be no. That's absurd. The whole system has become absurd. Maybe we'll talk about that. But Harold, I have to tell you,
you got to get to it.
Sunday the 12th.
Yes.
We started all over again at around noon. First panel was on the rise of Islamophobia. I can't pronounce everybody's names. But it was hosted by Reem Kadhudia, who I work with, and Evan Massoud, who's from D.C. The second panel was equally interesting, and that's the one we may take a look at the clip, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one
I brought now. We're not sure what we're going to be able to get on.
Yeah, we'll be able to get off of the clip. We'll get something. That had on it Michael Parenti, Peter Dale Scott, Mark Crispin Miller, and journalist Joe Lauria. Okay, good, yeah. The panel after that was one of my favorites. It had on it Mike Rupert.
Oh, Mike Rupert, yeah.
Wayne Madsen. Ralph Schoenman.
Schoenman, he's great. He's hardcore, yeah. Mark.
Hank Albarelli, who wrote the book, The Murder of Frank Olson, the CIA's Cold War experiments with LSD. And hosting that panel was an old friend of ours, Dick Gregory.
Oh, Dick Gregory, yeah. Is he still under the food? I mean, you know, the fresh food, I mean, raw food.
He's beginning a fast until we get some 9/11 truth, but he was amazing. And
yeah, we got noise coming here.
Yeah.
Oh, here, we're running a clip now. Let's run that.
Press conference.
There's Joe Lauria.
Political campaigns, presidential campaign, all of them.
The mic may be open.
Let's say in the front row is the press. You're the media.
So
behind the press, the public. So the press in the front row is watching what's going on before the curtain. They're not even quite sure there's anything going on behind the curtain. They're going to be reporting what happens
camera switch
publicly. And that's all very important. It needs to be covered. But let's say the performers in the back, there's a violent scene, there's a fist fight, and one of the actors suddenly is thrust through the curtains and appears on the stage. So you reporters are going to say, well, what the hell was that? You're going to want to report on that. What was that? So who do you ask? The people on the stage.
Okay.
They'll say, well, don't pay attention to that man behind the curtain. Hey, it's all, you know, it's all just, we can't really tell you because it jeopardizes national security. Now, you could just go and print that and forget about it, or you could say, well, wait a minute. There's something more to that. Well, they'll admit that it was a coup, there was an assassination, that's what happened, that's all it is. And that will be reported. But often the months of years behind coups, and I'm not talking about ones, I'm talking about ones abroad that have nothing to do with any Western country. They take preparation, and these things don't just happen overnight. Having said that, it is not easy to cover behind the curtain stories.
You'd be better off with running up to Michael Parenti.
Cover up by the mainstream media. It's just not that simple. You could try very hard to do that, and it's going to be very hard to get to that behind the curtain story. You need, hopefully, a whistleblower from there, credible, who was there, who on the side wants to talk about what was really going on there. You need more than one of those persons to make sure that independently that he or she's not just telling you a story. Obviously, you'd want documents. You want facts. You can't speculate. You cannot speculate. This is a very important point. The editors then will have to make a decision. If you go to them and say, look, I think I know what happened behind that curtain. It wasn't just so simple. I think I know how that person got killed or got thrown through the curtain. Now, the editors have to make the decision about whether the thing is covered or not. And there are a lot of challenges to that. And one of them is they may think it is an issue of national security as well. And I'll give you a good story we probably all know about JFK when he was doing the Bay of Pigs. The New York Times found out about it before the Bay of Pigs was launched. And he called the Times publisher and he said, please don't, I guess Salzburg or Oakes, Adam Oakes, I'm not sure who it was, don't run the story, blah, blah, blah. And the Times agreed not to run it. And it went ahead, and it was a disaster. And Kennedy later said, I wish the New York Times had published the story. It wouldn't have happened. Editors have to make a decision. You'll see, as I said, it's not monolithic. The New York Times ran the story about wireless wiretaps. Other papers may not have. Was that national security, or was it an overreach of government? Were they accumulating too much power for themselves? Are they going too far in the pursuit of security for American citizens by doing that? That is a decision each editor has to make independently, and I think the Times made the right one by publishing that story. And as you know, the reaction was furious. They wanted to even go after journalists for publishing classified information. Now, there are other obstacles, and one of them is there aren't just to publishing or investigating these stories. One of them is resources. We all know this. There aren't as many newspapers as there used to be. There's been enormous conglomeration in this business. And I don't know if that's even been a good business decision, but that's way above my pay grade because papers are dying now. They're doing very poorly. The fact that there are fewer papers means there are fewer opportunities for reporters. There are fewer reporters. There's so many laid off reporters. And the money is not there anymore for investigative units. And this costs money to find out what happened behind the curtain. It's not simple. You don't make just a few calls. That's not investigative journalism. I hear that all the time. Everybody's an investigative journalism. No, it is an enormous investment of time, effort, and money. And until you've nailed down what it is that really happened, you cannot publish. You cannot speak about it. And that leads me to one thing, and this, you may take this as a criticism, but I think a lot of editors and mainstream papers get turned off and they throw out the epithet of conspiracy theorists because people will maybe have a reasonable theory about what you think may have happened behind there. But until you know for sure and you can prove it, it's really wise not to say it. Because when you do, you cannot overnight morph a theory into fact, into proof. You don't have it. And when people go around and say they think they knew what happened in this or that situation, well, and you don't have anything to back it up, that really hurts the game in terms of trying to find out what's going on. And that hurts the efforts of journalists. Editors will have an excuse and say, a knee-jerk reaction, there's a conspiracy theory, forget it. Of course, we know that history, unfortunately, historians have
Okay, there we are. That was good. And we were going to be Mr. Parenti and so, but that was good. And the thing
well, hope maybe we can queue up to Mike Parenti in a bit. But on that panel alone, Joe Lauria, who is a working journalist for many years, has published in every major newspaper in the world, just about, including the Times of London, including the New York Times, including the Washington Post, etc. And also Mark Crispin Miller, who is
great.
Unbelievable. He was.
On the media.
We randomly, just ran the DVD up to a point. We got Joe, and Joe's very good. Peter Dale Scott is an icon. Is an icon. His whole model of continuity of government, and that there's a shadow government going on. He's got some pretty good proof for it. And then once again, Michael Parenti, who I think could probably be on the Letterman show as a comedian. If you
well, comedy helps, you know.
But what was interesting about the whole conference? This was not dry, drooping, whining, everything is wrong and we're the victims, we want reparations. No, these people were feisty. They're happy warriors and fighting for something they really believe in. And what the conference in a way was I.N.N's old guest list. Over 32 people.
Yeah,
over 32 people.
These people you've been delivering regularly on your
We
program.
got them all together, and I called them up.
Great.
I called every one of them up personally on the phone back in the end of July, beginning of August, and they said, of course, we'd love to come.
Yeah.
And we got a couple of, it was probably the cheapest produced conference of all time, in that everybody wanted to be there. Some people even paid for their own transportation. We helped out some others. We got a couple of co-sponsors, WBAI and Soundview Television and Puffin Foundation. Some of the others said, here's a little bit of money, make this happen. And we taped well over 16 hours worth of material, and we're editing it down into a 12-part series, which the first 2 parts are now for sale, I have to mention, and the shameless promotion comes in here. Go to the website. Go to the website, howtheworldchanged.org. There's also a link on the I.N.N.worldreport.net website, but howtheworldchanged.org, you can see the trailers, which are real snappy and fast moving, and the first 2 DVDs are for sale, and there are going to be more following. Now, WBI has been using them for premiums, and we understand Free Speech TV may be using them for premiums too. But I think you can get them a little bit cheaper if you get them directly through us.
Come to the bar.
You will not be disappointed with this DVD series.
Let's mention that again. The parent site. It's IWW.
No. Well, you can go www, but most computers don't need that now. It's just www. Is it a dot after that? No. That's our news site. If you want to get some really
But does the news site have links?
It has a link. It has a link to it. But no, you can go to INNworldreport.net.
Thank you. INNworldreport.net is an important source to go. I printed out all the stuff you're putting in. It's really a good alternate news source.
The thing is, howtheworldchanged.org has its own identity, its own page, and it has a way to get the DVDs from that site. Howtheworldchanged.org.
All right, very good. And where does all this stand? Where you got all these people, the people, I don't know, you would have had Noam Chomsky and all these kind of people, and Peter Zinn. And
well, Noam Chomsky
would have been there if he would have been or could have been. And there's a lot of people on that side. And where do we all stand now? And the people that are on that side of seeing things in view of where we stand now on November 5th of the year 2010. We've had this election and so forth, and the means by which that distribution of that, so it's called progressive. I'd come back to that again. What do you mean, what do we mean when we say progressive? The progressive community, what do we mean by the term progressive? And how do we identify you've got a large tent, a lot of different people, a lot of different issues, obviously. You got intellectuals galore. But what do we mean when we say progressive? And how can that progressive view of the world be distributed in a meaningful way to greater numbers of people to affect the reality of the political reality?
It's too many questions for me, Harold, but let me get back to progressive
What
first.
does it mean, progressive?
Well, what it means to me is equal opportunity and equal rights for people. People have a chance to make, from their lives or from their base ability as much as they can. They're not going to be inhibited. They're not going to be blocked. They're not going to come up against the unlevel playing field we have right now. Right now, there isn't a level playing field. New York is great in that you can go down any street and you can see small, family-owned businesses. I don't care if it's a pizza shop, I don't care if it's a shoe repair shop or a small electronics store or anything else, music store. In other parts, and New York still has those mixed in with all the mega corporations. Those mega corporations are multinational. They don't owe their allegiance to our country. They simply buy and sell governments and put people in power and buy influence and buy power and get legislation passed to promote their agenda.
The creation of that kind of a thing, of a multinational world, has been growing over many centuries. It began with the traders to China and that sort of thing, right? And it's becoming, it's part of an evolving world order, and you've got an internet that connects everybody. It's a global village.
Well, if you believe that that's the right thing,
not right.
Go have at it.
Wrong is the word I'm trying to avoid. It's an inevitable development of technological extension.
It's not inevitable. No, it's only inevitable if that's what you.
The world is united increasingly. It's not parochial. It's not back living.
Let's go back to the other model. In New York, at least, you still had individuals doing their thing. If you go out into the heartland and you go down the main street, you see the Walmart followed by the Kmart, followed by the Wendy's, followed by the McDonald's, followed by the Burger King, followed by the Gap, followed by every single corporation, mega corporation for every possible service you'd need in all, of course, in giant malls and conglomerations. And as soon as it ends, it starts all over again. I know highways that run through New Jersey are one mall or shopping center after another, and you can drive for hours. Nothing changes. How many of those, even in the big shopping malls, how many of those are owned by people? So what does that mean? The people that work there.
Practically nothing is owned, if I may, Lenny, that's what I was talking about with Mike Ravel and so forth. When you look at it, when George Bush made that huge singular tax cut at the beginning of his first administration.
Oh, don't worry, it's going to get extended in a minute here.
Well, we don't know, but he made that. The benefits of that, he wrote really well. The fellow in the New York Times, who writes on economics and so forth. He said
Krugman?
Pardon?
Krugman?
Krugman, yeah. That he wrote, and he said that the benefits of that didn't go only to the 1%. Not even to the 1%. In the bulk of the society, the benefits of that tax cut went to not only 1%, not even 1/10%, is some gain there, but it went overwhelmingly to the top 1/100th of 1% of the population of the country. It was beneficial to the plutocrats. That would be similar to the kings who used to live in castles in the feudal order, and that there are a few people at the top, and the capital assets are increasingly responsible for production. David Brooks saying they can make all kinds of stuff and they don't need people for it. They don't need the serfs to make things that were part of the productive process that gave value to the economic order, because it's becoming technological instruments that are contained within corporate stock ownership and bonds and so forth by the plutocratic class. And those ownership of that is all concentrated in the upper 1% or maybe 10% outside, 5–10% of the population. Everybody else, the only way they have to legitimately get income is to have a job on the estate, like a serf on the estate of the people who own the kingdom. And that still holds by the progressives. The progressives seem not to think that there's any important, if anything, they want to attack private property or private property ownership as a way of how are they going to distribute their demand to the people to buy what it is that the market can produce, or the supply and demand curve? How are they going to distribute buying power to the people if the people are going to be put out of the productive process by the technological development of everything becoming capital intensive? And the progressives only seem to think that the idea of individual ownership or stock or privatization, as they would call it, and so forth, is something relevant. That no, we don't want any ownership. We don't want to get income because we own a piece of productive equipment or something like that, because we will have a job and we will have and it's the only thing they focus on is creating jobs. And Mr. Keynes said they're going to be put out of the process of contributing to production. So we have an existential problem confronting us. How are we going to build demand into the people if the job roles that have been assigned to them in the free market, in the private sector, are going to follow market principles? There'll be competition to advantage those people that have those ownership and so forth. That's the question that I'm saying. How do we define a progressive vis-a-vis the institution of private property ownership of capital assets?
I'm not sure. But
okay, what do you think? Should we just tax them 100% and then distribute it all through the government? Are we going to tax them? That's what the Tea Party was about. It was about safing the institution of private property. And are we going to have to address that now? That is the Democrats, Mr. Obama and so forth. Are they going to not be able to, as the Tea Party and the right-wing people are wanting to vouchsafe, is the institution of private property, all the advantages that go to the plutocrats?
Harold, that's kind of a big topic to charge into right there. I see the American people as being just a service economy. If you can make it for $1 in China, why would you want to make it for $20 here? So the capitalists, which have no allegiance to a better country, only to more money for the plutocrats, are of course going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it. Yeah, that's outsourcing, and that's a thing. That's Ricardo.
But there has to be, in other words, if everybody works at McDonald's or at the clothing store, wherever they work, they have jobs, and then they consume from the other places that they don't work at. It's a service-based economy. It's no longer a manufacturing-based economy.
Okay,
now how do we tie that to private property? I don't know. You got to have enough.
How do we private to the private sector? There were people on the left who would like to eliminate the private sector. They do collectivism. Everything's collective, government, apparatchik, that kind of thing run. And that's not something that's going to work.
I don't consider that a progressive model.
No, you don't. That's what I
consider that a full communist model,
right.
A full socialist model.
How are we going to distribute demand?
Look at back in my father's day. My father, you've heard this analogy 1,000 times, not from me, from everyone, about everyone's father. The breadwinner could have a job. He could have one job with just the money from that one job. Yeah. He could have a car and a house and a few other things.
And send the kids to college. That's what we were after the Second War.
All right, so now, of course, we know now everybody knows how the models change. You've got both parents working. You're in debt up to your ears. If you miss a day at work, you're going to lose your house, car, kids, and everything else. All right, and don't get cranky. Your social services will take them away. So what is the difference? That's the government.
That's the private public sector.
What is the change? How do we define this change? Well, the spread of wealth. Back then, in 1968, let's say, the division between the middle class, middle class was built after World War II.
Absolutely.
The GI Bill, the creation of the middle class and all that.
Golden era for
the golden era, for the American worker.
For the American,
We went from that to a stronger capital model, and those capitalists said, why should I pay you $22 an hour to make a wheel for my car when I can pay some poor schlep over in China who I'll never have to meet his family, or
and they could also violate all kinds of environmental laws and everything.
Labor laws, every other law.
Everything.
Why wouldn't you do that? Well,
just exploit the really super poor,
Capitalism, and this is strictly my opinion and not endorsed by anyone else, is very much like a shark. It lives to grow, to eat and grow.
It must move through water.
It must move through water. It must eat, and it must grow. Well, how do we? What would a solution be? A solution isn't necessarily to socialize. It would be a very interesting activist I used to work with at the Indie Media Center in New York. Said, listen, all we need is charter reform. I want you to be a millionaire. I think that you should be a millionaire. I think you should have $5 million. But I think there should be a cap limit, and you can be a very wealthy man with $5 million. I don't think you should have the right to have $200 million on other people's backs. After a while, there's got to be a stop. So if the richest people in the world could still be the richest people in the world, but there was somehow a major tax or a major cap or a major something, and this has to be worldwide, after they're already filthy rich and never have to worry a day in their lives.
First of all, they're not going to buy anything because they can't buy anything more than they've already got. So
they can't right now, but after that, it doesn't become money for the sake of your life, for the sake of your family security. It becomes simply the instrument of power, and that power grows, and then you do things. But there's been completely, it's been completely stripped between any kind of a social consciousness, any kind of a social responsibility, and getting as filthy rich and manipulating and buying as many politicians as possible. That's what it appears. That's what it appears. That's democracy.
That's the best democracy money can buy, Greg Palast said, and that's the thing we're in. But it's beyond that thing of outsourcing. That's there, and you can get efficiencies and that sort of thing. But it's also going to apply to the rest of the world, because the inevitable movement is for things not to be produced in the economy, in this mass economy, televisions, computers, automobiles and things, the railroads.
The profit goes to Wall Street, how does it matter?
It's going to be done by capital instruments. It's the whole movement since we invented the club. It's been that whole process. And you can't have it all owned by one small group that overwhelmingly becomes wealthy. You got to have everybody have an ownership of the combine producing the grain, so that they have a source of income, so they have the money to clear the market. It's supply and demand. You're not going to have the demand to clear the market.
How about
Keynes warned about it.
How about this? You can buy the combine that harvests the grain, and it can make you all the money you want, up into, say, $10 million a year, or $5 million a year, or $2 million, or some reasonable number.
That idea of a limit might be something that's going to be discussed in the time ahead.
What's going to happen? The greedy people of America have more than the entire rest of the world, or the greedy the greedy capitalists in different places in the world, whether it's in Rio or in Paris or
it's everywhere.
Switzerland, the greedy capitalists are going to hang on as much as they can until, as a rule, that there's something that says, look, okay, you can do what you're going to do, but we've got too many people starving out there.
Yeah, right.
We've got too many people dying, and you're sitting there trying to figure out what color to paint your yacht.
Yeah, but you've also, like David Brooks said, you got the ability to produce, but the people are not going to have the ability, if they're not involved in the production through labor as a serf or make work or something, they're not going to have the money that they get from a job to buy what can be produced. Well, that's the problem.
One of the
demand is what has to be a way of distributing demand or buying power to the people outside of just government taxation, tax and spend.
Well, we're really talking a different game here.
It's the big question confronting humanity.
One of the wonders of charter reform is that, yes, you can make your $1 billion or your million, whatever your cap limit is.
Charter reform.
Charter reform. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Your corporation, the corporation that makes the combines, let's say.
Yeah.
They
can be owned by everybody.
No, it can be owned by an individual, but there's a cap limit on how filthy rich he can get.
Okay, why not have
And also, he has to be able to employ people. Charter reform means a district.
It is.
Your corporation lives in Ohio, or it lives in Pennsylvania, and you have to employ people from Pennsylvania or Ohio.
Okay.
That's what I say.
Well, okay, that's very good.
But you can still become rich. Your incentive is you're going to become rich, and we don't mind a bit.
We just scratched the surface of the big question, because I think the overall ownership has to be dispensed among everybody of that thing, because the people are not going to be relevant to have labor.
Well, then you can buy stock in that individual's company.
You have to assist them to let that happen. Great talking to you, Lenny. So good to talk. I hope you get on free speech and all over the world, because it's great programming. Your pleasure to have your perceptions. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Please tune in. Thanks a lot for coming, and just scratch the surface of the questions that are confronting us in terms of the way the planet's going to operate in the time ahead.